asato ma sadagamaya tamaso maham jyotirgamaya mrityormam amritam gamaya avir maehi rudra yate dakshinam mukha tena maham pahinityam. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness unto light. Lead us from death to immortality, and reach us through and through ourselves, and evermore protect us from ignorance by thy sweet, compassionate face. My subject this morning is body, mind, and spirit. And we can begin by visualizing a scene depicted in the Bhagavad Gita where Sri Krishna and Arjuna are in the chariot. The chariot is on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and the horses are ready to gallop into the battle. And it so happens that this very scene was really anticipated 1,000 years before, described in an analogy given in the Katha Upanishad in the 3rd chapter, where it compares the jiva, that means the living soul, ourself, saying that the body is like a chariot, and the senses are the horses, and the mind is like the reins that control the horses, and the intellect is like the charioteer, and the soul, the self within us, is like the rider in the chariot. So here we have our image of body, mind, and spirit. Now, you already know a lot about the body. So let's just count that as finished. And let's focus first on the mind. Of interest to us as students of yoga psychology, maybe it'd be helpful for us just to review what is the Indian idea of the mind. The mind in Sanskrit is called the antakarana, that is the inner working. And it's contrasted with the outer workings or the outer equipments, which we call the senses, the 5 senses of perception and the organs of action. This antakarana, the mind, has 4 functions. There's the lower mind, there's the higher mind, there's the ego, and then there's what we would call, in Western psychology, we call the unconscious. Now let's just look at those a little bit. The lower mind, Sanskrit is called the manas, and it's very helpful for us to incorporate these. I'm going to give you 4 or 5 Sanskrit words that are really integral in understanding yoga psychology. And in fact, I think you'll find these words in any Webster's Desktop Collegiate Dictionary today. First is manas, often translated confusingly as mind. However, the word man, the Sanskrit root man, is what we understand as man. And what is man? Man is the rational animal, the thinking animal. And so the manas is the perceptual mind. It's the mind that we share pretty much in common with higher animals. Sometimes it's translated as attention because we can't even begin to perceive and to think unless we place our attention or give our attention to the object of our thought. And so if someone rings the dinner bell and we're absorbed in our reading or study, we don't hear it, our mind is elsewhere. And so intention is one of the four functions of the lower mind, the manas. Giving our attention now, the manas is able to handle perception. And all of the sensory inputs from all the senses coming in are managed by this doorkeeper, and we form percepts. So the lower mind is the perceptual mind. Those percepts are referred to our self-concept and to the unconscious. It's matched up. And there's a feeling response. There's no perception, no thought, without some feeling response that is raga, dvesha, that is positive, negative. It's colored. And so the manas, the lower mind, is often called the seat of emotion and feeling. This manas is often compared to its function, is compared to a supervisor in a factory. And the supervisor gives directions to all of the workers. But he himself takes directions from the boss or the manager of the factory. Similarly is the manas. The manas is it's in charge of input and output. And we hear the dinner bell. Our attention is on the bell. It's integrated. We refer it to ourselves. How do I feel about it? What does that mean to me? Oh, that's a dinner bell. Yes, oh, I'm hungry. So yeah, positive. Yes, that's something I want to do. I get up from my chair and I go to the dinner table. This is all the function of the lower mind. It all pretty much happens automatically. Now, there's another function of mind, the antakarana. And that is the higher mind. The higher mind is called the buddhi. And that means the intelligence within us. Intelligence has the function, there's a lower involved intelligence, which we call instinct. Then there's human intelligence, which we call reason. Then there's evolved or higher spiritual intelligence, which we call intuition. So the buddhi is the intelligence in human beings, that is, it's our reason. It's our reason that makes us human, that distinguishes us from plants and animals. The function of this, of reason, is a very refined form of matter and energy. And its first function is to reflect pure consciousness. It catches the reflection of consciousness, and this is what we call the sense of the I consciousness within us. So the buddhi is the source and the seat and the ground of our I consciousness. The buddhi also we can translate as reason. That is, it's a faculty that we have of not just of perception, but of abstracting from particular perceptions and forming concepts, and then making judgments about those concepts, And then also about forming a rational argument, and about logical thinking and argument to justify those concepts. This is all part of higher human thinking. The higher function of the buddhi is called intuition. It's just evolved reason. And the buddhi is the gate, the intuition. We could call it spiritual reason. We could call it, it is the gateway to the superconscious. And the students of yoga and of self-development, this is our focus in the practice of training. This is part of the trained higher mind. It's not natural, but it comes with training to develop these higher levels of the superconscious, which is part of the higher mind, the higher self. Okay, that's function number 2 of the mind. I said there's 4 functions of the antakarana. Function number 3, the ego. Now, the ego, we can say, well, didn't you say that the buddhi is the source of the self? Yeah, but the ego is not the self. The buddhi is the sense of the buddhi is the self under ignorance, subject to avidya and doing superimposition. And the students of Vedanta philosophy, you understand how we are subject to ignorance. And thus we call it, using the Freudian term, the ego, literally the I am, but it's the confused I am. That is, it's ourself. We know that we exist. There's no doubt about that. But we don't know who we are. And that's why we go around. The ego is the one who goes around. The body is sitting in a chair. We say, oh, I'm sitting in a chair. And the ears hear something. You say, oh, I'm hearing that. I see something. You say, I'm seeing that. Like that, the job of the ego is to take ownership of everything. That's the sense that we have, the limited self-sense, we could call it. Now, it's this ego, which we know very well, which is that processes perceptions and thoughts and feelings. And in so doing, every thought, every percept, every feeling creates in the lake of the mind. Let's imagine the surface of the mind like a lake. Produces a wave of thought, of feeling. And that wave is in consciousness. But then when it passes, it rises and falls, it goes down into the submerged state. We call it the chitta, the mind stuff. We could call it the unconscious. Everything that we perceive, that we think and feel and experience, goes down into the energy is not lost. The vibration still remains, even though on the surface the vritti has died down. But it goes down into the unconscious, and there it is retained as memory. And so we can imagine our whole life is kind of a hierarchy or stratification of all the experiences that we've had are piled one on top of the other. Some are long ago and buried deep down in the psyche. Others are right on the surface. Those are memories. But there's another aspect of the unconscious, which in addition to memory, which is also a memory, but it's of a special kind. It's called a samskara. That means it's an interested memory. It's everything that we've experienced and that we have related to ourself. Sometimes we experience things and we just see it. We're neutral. But whenever we see things, so we experience something that we relate to ourselves personally, it goes down it becomes a samskara. That means it's like a chip off the rock that's chipping away at our psyche, our character, our personality. It's forming our inner self-image. And so we have two things. One is we have just a resume of everything that we've done and experienced. That's kind of third-person objective. Then we have a much more subjective inner sense, our self-concept, our own personal story, my character story. I'm the hero, and I have a story, my whole history. That's all in the unconscious. And that history, my sense of self, influences everything I see, feel, touch, every person I meet, every experience I have. Color is always referred to that self-image. It determines how I perceive the world, how I know and understand things, and in fact, it determines my destiny. So these are the four functions. This is called functional psychology. It's the old ancient classical form of psychology. And these four functions they work together. They're like the musicians in a musical band. They all play together. And although we can conceptually isolate them, as I've just done, I've given, but really, for all practical purposes, we can't. There's no sensation without perception. There's no perception without conception. There's no conception without self-sense, and there's no self-sense of perception without the impression, the memory, and the impression in the unconscious. All those are kind of baked together. And they form our mind. Now, in the analogy, we're talking about the chariot, the senses, by which we mean that the sense powers, not the physical organs, and the mind, which are like the reins controlling the senses. That's the lower mind, the buddhi, the manas. Then we have the buddhi, the higher mind. In addition to those four things, which are the mind, there is another. And that is the rider in the chariot. That is our true self. Now, you know very well, as students of Indian philosophy, students of the Vedanta philosophy, the fundamental teaching of the whole of the Vedanta philosophy is that you are the self. That you are, in your true nature, you are not the body and you're not the mind. But that you're not the five elements that make up the physical body. You're not the flesh and blood body that's born, grows old, and dies. You're not your thoughts, your feelings, which rise and fall like waves on the surface of the lake. You're not your persona. You're not even your character. You're not the story that you tell yourself. But rather, you are the spirit. The spirit is like the rider in the chariot, like Sri Krishna. And although there is communication between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, yet the spirit is somehow aloof and is somehow separate. That is, it's a higher reality. It includes and transcends. But now, as the spirit, you are not physical, you're metaphysical. You're not personal, you're transpersonal. You're not limited, you are unlimited in your true nature. And that's why we call the true nature of man is the spirit. The spirit is, by definition, it is not limited. It is infinite. Well, there's some birds in here. We'll have occasion to refer to the birds later. And so that's your true nature, one only without a second. That is a higher reality. And you know very well that that is yourself. All of you are students of the Vedanta philosophy. You've read many books on philosophy. You know that you're not the body and you're not the mind, that you are the spirit. And yet we know, too, that the goal and purpose of our life is not knowledge. That is, the goal and purpose of our life is realization. It is enlightenment. And enlightenment is knowledge plus character. That means it's not enough for us to know these truths of Vedanta. It's assumed from the very beginning that this is not an intellectual exercise. This is not a course on the academic course in philosophy. This is all about who you really are and about self-realization. And therefore, we have to, the goal of our life is to bring these two parts of the equation together, that is our knowledge and our character, and to realize, that is to embody and to manifest these truths in our own experience. And so that is our immediate spiritual purpose. Now, if we could do that, if we succeed in doing that, and we look at the example of saints and sages who have succeeded in that realization, then we know that there emerges from that a picture of a natural order of things. This is a very ancient classical concept. There is a natural order of things. It begins when it goes from the lower to the higher, from the gross to the subtle to the causal, from the unconscious to the conscious, from the body, which is composed of 5 elements, to the energy of the body, that is to say, matter and energy, to the lower mind with its thoughts and its feelings, thinking, feeling, willing, to the higher mind, to reason, to the intuition, to the spirit within. This is the progression. This is the hierarchy. And as long as everything is in order, that is, our passions and our desires are subject to reason, and our body is subject to our higher spiritual discrimination, and we're living in the light of the self, then everything works together in harmony like a very beautiful family, good family. But now we can see that our condition today is not quite yet maybe in full alignment. That's our condition today. And our problem here is not with the body. The body is perfectly happy and good and going along automatically, has no problem. And there's no problem with the, I say there's no problem with the body. Well, you may be fat or you may be sick, but those are not problems of the body. Body deals with that automatically. That's part of its natural thing. Those are problems of the ego. The higher self, the Atman, has no problems. The problem lies somewhere in between. And in fact, today we could picture ourselves maybe as somehow caught in a progression between the lower and the higher mind. That's where we're at. And you've seen that picture, famous picture in psychology books about there's a man, and on his left shoulder he's got a little devil. And on the right shoulder he's got an angel. Right? And they're both whispering. The angel's whispering something in his ear. Devil's whispering something in his ear. He's going back and forth, back and forth. This is our condition today. There's a battle going on. It's a spiritual battle going on within us between the spirit and the flesh. Between what in Christianity is called what is it called? The world, the devil, and the flesh. Those are three on the left side. The higher side is the spirit. That is Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. This is the debate going on. We're somewhere in the middle. So we've got to choose between the Shreyas and the Preyas, that is between the good, what we know is good and right and true, and between what we want to do. That's our choice. That's our struggle. So let's look here a little bit more closely at the lower and the higher mind. The lower self and the lower mind first. Now our lower self, we could say, is what we call in ordinary psychology, studied by schools of psychology. We could call it the ego, in a sense, that it is our ordinary, everyday, walking around, worldly self. It's our self that's completely absorbed in the physical, material things, completely forgetful of our higher nature, and living in the world, and yet feeling somehow small and incomplete and limited, and wanting really only one thing, and that is a little bit of happiness. This is the goal of the lower self. This is the goal that is happiness, the word happiness. By the word happiness there, of course, what we mean, really, we can give some high definitions of happiness, but what we really mean is just sense pleasures and ego gratification, and maybe even that just to have a little fun, a little entertainment, something to look forward to, something that makes us smile, that gives us happiness, that gives us some joy and enjoyment in life. This is the lower self we're talking about. That's our ideal. That's our purpose. The lower self is referred to in Christian mysticism as the natural man. Natural man, subject to the passions, the 6 passions. Also called in Christian mysticism, the fallen man. Why fallen? Because he's subject to the 7 deadly sins. This is the lower self acting, driven by its own selfish motives, laying down some scars in the unconscious, getting trapped in the vicious circle of karma and in the great wheel of transmigration. Lower self. The jiva, we could call it. The embodied self, associated with the lower mind. What is the lower mind? It's called the lower mind because it's the mind which is closest to the body. As yoga psychology say, there's five selves. There's the body, and there's the energy self, then there's the mind self. And so this lower, because it's directly in contact with the senses and the body and the energies within us. And so for that reason, we call it's called the lower mind. The lower mind is by nature outgoing. It's outward facing. Its natural tendency is outward and downward. It's in a usual state of turmoil, of perceptions and scattered thoughts and desires, and lives in a perpetual state of rajas. Samas, rajas, sattva, more Sanskrit words, I'm sorry. Rajas means compulsive activity, moving forward, always advancing the plot of the story. Never any time to sit quietly and slow down, stop, smell the flowers, or do introspection. No, we've got to get on with achievements in the future. This is the lower mind. It's in a state of rajas. And we could compare the lower mind with the mind of a child. A child is like a child. It's like an undisciplined, spoiled child who runs around making chaos of the house, screaming and yelling. Oh, good child. We love the child, you see, but he needs a little training, needs a little discipline. So that's the lower self, the lower mind. Let's contrast that with the higher self and the higher mind. The higher self we could call our spiritual self. That is the Atman. It is pure consciousness reflected in the buddhi as our self-consciousness. It's our higher sense of our higher sense of self. They say that, well, at one time I thought. We think like this. Our minds work like this, maybe, in the course of our evolution. At one time, long ago, I thought that I was a body when I was very young, and that I had a mind. But as I grew and matured, and I realized that, no, I am actually a mind. And I have a body. And maybe I also have a soul. But as time passed and matured some more, we come to realize that I'm a soul, and that I have a body, and I have a mind. And so like this, we come attempt to identify with the higher mind. The higher mind is the soul within us. The higher mind, the purpose of life for the higher self is just to live in the Spirit. It's to walk in the Spirit and to live every moment of every day in awareness of our true nature. That's the purpose. Our purpose is not happiness. Our purpose here is to embody self-knowledge and to embody the truth, which will enable us to be who we really are. So this higher self is associated with the higher mind. The higher mind now in Sanskrit is called the buddhi. Remember, all of this is material. The mind and the body are all material. It's only the self, the Atman, which is immaterial. The higher mind is, we could say, it's called higher, by the way, because, well, it's the sattvic mind. And it's called sattvic, S-A-T is the word, which in Sanskrit means reality. It also means satyam, that is truth. It means goodness. These are all embedded in that concept of the sattvic mind is the pure mind, the higher mind that's identified with reality, and that is identified with living in the truth. That's the sattvic mind. The sattvic mind also is characterized by higher reason. That is we say that the buddhi means the intellect. The intellect reflects pure intelligence. Intelligence in the lowest state, there's involved intelligence is called instinct. Human intelligence is called reason. Evolved intelligence is called intuition. And if we take ourselves through higher reason, That is enlightened reason. We call it vichara, call it viveka, and discrimination. This is the function, the natural function of the mind. See, the mind has the thoughts, the thinking. There's two kinds of thinking. There's ordinary thinking, which is the lower mind, which just means a rat running in a maze, that's all. There's no discrimination, there's no intention, it's just free association, and it's automatic, it's unconscious, it's not self-reflective. And the higher thinking, however, is intentional, it's rational in the true sense. See, even the lower mind has reason, we're not animals, we have reason, but it's instinctive reason. We have to up-level and evolve our reason to human reason, and then to enlightened, divine reason. And this is the buddhi. This is the higher mind, characterized by, sometimes in Sanskrit it's called the vijnana maya kosha. This is the mind that is identified with wisdom. The higher mind means all of the wisdom, that is all of the insight into living. We've got to define wisdom as all of your deeper experience, your deeper understanding of reality. That wisdom begins to unfold in the superconscious. So there we have it. We have a lower mind, a higher mind. Somehow we're kind of, we're somewhere caught between the two. And we always come, as the Upanishad says, we're always coming to a crossroads. And we always have choice. See, remember, buddhi, that is to say intelligence, presupposes two things. It presupposes, that is rationality. It presupposes free will. And it presupposes language. Both things which are markers of the humankind. And therefore, we have choice. We always have come to a crossroads. We have that freedom of choice, the great law of karma. Between what? The good and the pleasant. Between the higher mind, do we identify with the higher mind? And do we identify with the lower mind? And our condition today is one of struggling. You know, Sri Ramakrishna says there's 4 kinds of men: bound, the struggling, the free, the ever free. Well, we're not free. We're not ever free yet. But we're also not completely bound. We're struggling. Now, this struggle is between the lower mind and the higher mind. It's not a horizontal movement. It's going to be a vertical movement. And it is also, however, a very natural progression in the course of time. As time passes, we grow, we mature, come to the age of adolescence, come to the age of reason, come to the dawn of discrimination and some awakening. But the fundamental process here is one of shifting the ego sense, shifting of the self sense from the lower to the higher, and eventually to identify with our true nature. This is what spiritual life is. Spiritual life is learning to identify with our higher self, our higher mind. Once we are engaged in that process, there are 2 things that come to help us. I'm forging ahead here because, by the way, sometimes they wanted to leave some time for questions. So if you have some question or some pushback or some commentary, maybe you could formulate something, because we'll have some minutes here at the end. So we're saying here, in our struggle for we have repositioning the ego, ourself. our sense of self. It's a shifting. We have to reordering our priorities from the lower to the higher. And we have to reorder those priorities so that we can enable ourselves to grasp our own spirituality. That's the process. Luckily, we are helped here, well, for one thing, where we have become aware of the teachings of the wisdom of the East and of the Vedanta philosophy. See, the whole of this Vedanta philosophy is about the answers to fundamental three questions, fundamental questions: who am I? What is the nature of the world? And the nature of God? What is the origin of all things? These are philosophical, metaphysical questions that can never, ever be answered by sense perception, can never be answered by science, can never be answered by the intellect, by reasoning, by inference. The answers to these questions, that is, these higher questions: who am I? What is the nature of reality? What is the cause of the universe? Does God exist? All these questions can only be answered by scripture, by revelation. That's what Vedanta is. Vedanta is the revelation of these great truths of the Vedas. And so this is how it helps us to clarify in our struggle, what is the higher self? Otherwise, who knows? The only way we can know what is our true self is through the revelation. And so we have that help. But in addition, I say, once we have come to that problem, we have two other things come to help us in our spiritual practice. And as a student of the practice of yoga, two things. Number one is that as soon as you begin spiritual practice, you are going to begin to tap into the unconscious. That is, there is a part of the unconscious which are, I said, the impressions, right, of all your past experiences, all your samskaras. But we have to know that there are both bad samskara, worldly and spiritual. They're both good and bad, the shubha and the ashubha samskara. There's a whole circuitry in our unconscious of good habits. In previous lives, we've done many spiritual practices, had done many great thoughts, and had wonderful experiences. It's all within our own unconscious. Yet we're not used to turning on the switches of that circuitry. We turn on that circuitry, we have a whole influx of power that comes to help us in our spiritual progress. That's one help that we have. That's just by the grace of our unconscious. The second thing that comes to help us is the grace of God. That means there is a power, the Mahamaya. Mahamaya has two powers. One is avidya, which drags the mind down and out and tempts us and leads us astray. The other is vidya maya, knowledge. And the vidya maya is that power which enables us to rise up, to go within, and to rise inward and upward. That power comes to our aid now, because we are now aligned with the higher self. And so Vidya Maya comes to help us and aid us in our struggle. The whole of our struggle is summarized in beautiful verses. Chapter 6 of the Katha Upanishad and the Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Dva Suparna Sayuja Sakaya Samanam Vriksham Parishasvajate. Tayoranya Pipalam Swadva Taneshnan Nanyo Abhichakashiti. Two famous verses. I quote to you those Sanskrit words just to show you that this is not a New Age philosophy. It's thousands and thousands of years ago. They thought the same subject what we're talking about this morning. They discussed the same things. They had the same struggle. And there in the beautiful analogy, those two verses, it says there that there are two birds. Two birds. That's our soul. On the self-same tree. One of the birds is the lower bird. He's hopping around on the lower branches. He's pecking at the sweet and the bitter fruits. And the other bird, calm, quiet, majestic, seated on the topmost limb, surveyed the whole of the forest there. He looks upon, sitting there calmly, quietly, without eating. And the lower bird hops around, gets a sweet fruit and is happy, and he gets a bitter fruit and is very disgusted. Turns his head, looks up, and there he sees that glorious higher bird. Feels an attraction, hops up one branch and then gets distracted again. Pecking the sweet and the bitter fruits, then gets a bitter fruit, looks up again, hops up one or two more branches. Like that, time passes. And gradually he hops up, and then an amazing thing happens. Where once there were two birds, now there's only one. The second bird, the lower bird, disappears. And you know how in a forest sometimes maybe there's a gentle breeze that's blowing, the sun is shining, and there's reflections caught in the branches of the trees. And sometimes it creates illusions in those branches. Similarly, there's the illusion of the lower bird, that is our lower self, the jiva, our embodied self. And the higher bird, which is our true nature. And so in the end, we realize there's a body, the mind, and the soul. Tree is like the body, the lower mind, the higher mind, the body, the mind, the spirit. And in the end, the spirit alone remains. Okay, so now we have a few minutes. Yeah, we have about 5 minutes or so, or more. And if you have some question, or you have some commentary, or some pushback, we used to go into the library, but I guess we don't do that anymore. But if you have some something that you would like to share?
You have a question, Swami?
Yes, I kind of see here with the reflected light. Just speak up, yeah.
Yes, thank you so much. I thought this was wonderful. This is my first time attending as well, so found this wonderful. One thing that I've been struggling with is kind of the mechanic between how the soul interacts with the mind. Because I'm confused about if the mind is informing the soul, or the soul is sort of informing the mind, and how the two are interacting. And if you said that there's a mechanic involved with that, and I was just curious if there was a simple explanation as to what's going on between the two. If the question makes sense.
Well, the Vedanta philosophy uses analogical reasoning to discuss that issue. And the analogy there is pratibimbavada, that is, if we imagine that there's a pot that has some water in it, and the sun is shining, and it reflects, the sun is reflected in the pot. And so the pot is like our self-consciousness. The sun is our true self. That's the relation. What is the relation? Really, there's no relation. I mean, the pot may water dry up and the pot break, the sun remains. So there's no essential relation, but it appears that the spirit, the consciousness, is reflected in our psyche. That is in the buddhi. And so yes, that's the analogy. Yes. Question, pushback, disagreement.
This is also my first time here. illness is of the ego, and I was just wondering, how does one then heal for physical illness? Is it something that they must they heal their ego to heal their physical
Yeah.
body?
Well, maybe that was a little misleading, but I'm saying what is meant here is that all of the complexes that we have are in the ego. Let's say that I'm fat. That's I feel very self-conscious because I'm fat. I have a fat complex. See, but that fatness is not a problem. That's not a complex in the body. The body has no problem with fat. It processes fat. It's a machine. It has no feelings one way or the other. It has no connection. The complex is in the ego. That's the problem. That's where the problem lies, and that's ultimately where the solution lies. With the complex, it doesn't mean that illness is in the ego. It means is that you're not the body, you're not the mind. Therefore, the spirit in your true nature, you can objectify and manage your body and your emotions. You can manage them because you transcend them. Yeah. No? Okay. Here we have one here. Last question here. Yes, sir.
What are the different ways, the practical ways to hop up on the tree and go to the higher self?
That's a question?
Yeah.
Isn't that the practical way?
What are the different ways?
Yeah, well, those different ways are called yoga sadhana. That's called spiritual practice. And there are many different ways in which we can grow. Really, the question is, how can we grow? And for all practical purposes, we know that just like the bird teaches the lesson. The bird does not jump up to the top limb instantaneously. There's a whole process. It jumps up gradually, from one branch to another, until it merges, and in the end, it realizes its true nature. Yeah. Okay, I think we'll stop here. Yeah. Om Dyo Shanti Antariksha Shanti Prithvi Shanti Apa Shanti Oshadaya Shanti Vanaspataya Shanti Vishwe Deva Shanti Brahma Shanti Saravam Shanti Shantireva Shanti Same Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om. Peace is in heaven, peace is on the earth, peace is in the sky and in the waters. The herbs and plants and trees are full of peace. The gods are peaceful. May this eternal universal peace enter our souls and beings. Om. Peace, peace, peace be unto us all.